The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2, "So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work His good pleasure." It's likely that you've heard the phrase, "work out your salvation," many times. It's also likely that you've misunderstood it many times. The Apostle Paul is not suggesting that each of us have the personal responsibility to work out each of our own individual salvation. Not at all. In fact, when the Apostle Paul says, "work out your salvation with fear and trembling," the word "your" is plural. Paul is saying that we must work out our salvation together as a community, as the church, as the people of God. It's not an individual walk with Jesus. It is all of us together, coming together, working together, allowing God's grace to change us together so that we can be formed into the people of God. For this to happen, this requires a change of attitude. And in Philippians 2:5, Paul encourages us to nurture the attitude of Christ, to put on the mind of Christ, an attitude in which we empty ourselves, in which we are humbled. Christ emptied himself and Christ humbled himself. In other words, if we're to work out our salvation together, we must resist our individual self-interest for the sake of the will of God and the well-being of the greater community of God. And finally, Paul wants us to understand that God's work of grace in us must be worked out through us. In other words, we're not earning our own salvation, and it's not simply something that God is doing in us. It is something that God wants to work out of us. God's grace being demonstrated in the way we live our lives. God's grace being demonstrated in our gracious acts. God's grace, a seed planted in us, but works out through us so that we can reveal God's good pleasure to the world. God bless you.